Hi, this is Cathy for Trans by Deaf, and this week we have a very interesting topic. We're talking about the relationship between gender and sexuality. I find this to be very, very intriguing. I go back to some discussions that occurred around my kitchen table in the 1950s and 60s when my mother, who was a junior college English teacher at the local junior college, and Mrs. Kaufman, who was the premier high school English teacher at the high school I went to, would sit and talk about the evolution of the English language. In the 1950s and 60s and into the 70s, when I had Mrs. Kaufman as my English teacher, she said that gender was used exclusively for pronouns. That would determine the sex which you were talking about, and that you should use the proper pronoun to determine the sex of the person who you were addressing, that it was rude and inappropriate to use an improper pronoun on somebody that you were addressing. And that's the way I grew up in the 60s and 70s, and the background that I have. In the 70s, there was a landmark study by John Money where he went through and he defined sexuality and defined gender and led to the way in which we use gender today. His use of gender is more in a sociological manner. He uses gender to be the presentation that you're using and the behaviorisms and mannerisms that you have that represent you. So his discussion is that what we present and what we feel inside and how we behave represents the gender that we are. This has progressed on with WPATH and other organizations looking at gender and defining the use of gender almost exclusively as the way in which we used sex in the 1950s. We refer to everything as what gender is that, and then we go back and use the appropriate pronouns for that gender. We still have not gotten away from what Mrs. Kaufman taught me in high school English about using the appropriate pronouns to represent the gender that we have. That has not changed. The fact that we use sex less and less of being male and female, particularly in the sociological realms, is related to our image that we want to portray. And we want to portray, as trans people, the image that we feel inside. We do not want to portray the sex that we are or the sexual organs that we have. We want to portray the way we feel inside. Inside, I feel like a woman, even though my sex is a male. And I think that differentiation is still there. But I can see with time that gender is going to replace sex, and sex is becoming a very obsolete term. I also want to talk about discussions with the people who are scientists. Scientists, particularly in biology, they are still talking about sex. And so I think sometime in the 1970s, there was a divergence between the social behavioral people with gender to sexuality and the science people. In the realm where I work as a scientist, basically we say what is the sex of the organism that we're looking at, and we don't say what is the gender of the organism. We say what is the sex. But even now and again you will see creeping into the science that sociological aspect of sex. In the sciences we are interested in what type of reproductive organisms they have. We have some that even change from male to female through their life cycle. So we are very concerned about what is the sex at that particular point in time in the life of that individual. We are not concerned in the behavioral aspects of that individual. So in that realm, I see a very distinct divergence between the scientific community and the sociological community. So I feel that if we go and look, if my mother and Mrs. Kaufman were sitting there at our dining table discussing sexuality and gender, they would be very excited to see how the English language has evolved along the sociological realms and how the scientific realms tend to still remain with the old 1950s usage. And I find that very intriguing, and I thank you for listening to me this week, and I hope to see you again next week. Bye.